طيبة كأنها رواية جد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت نعم جدك تحت الكساء. فأقبل الحسن نحو الكساء فقال السلام عليك يا جده يا رسول الله، أتظنني أن أدخل معك تحت الكساء؟ فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب حوزي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل معه تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. فما كان الله سعد وإذا بولد الحسين قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أمه. فقلت عليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي. فقال لي يا أمه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت نعم جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء. فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء فقال السلام عليك يا جده، السلام عليك يا من اختاره الله، أتظن لي أن أكون معكما تحت الكساء؟ فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافع أمتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل معهما تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فأقبل من ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب فقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله. فقلت وعليك السلام يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين. فقال يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك روحة طيبة كأنها رأيت أخي وابن عمي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت نعم ها هو ما ولديك تحت الكساء. فأقبل علي نحو الكساء فقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله، أتظنني أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ فقال هو عليك السلام يا أخي ويا وثي وخليفتي وصاحب لواء، قد أذنت لك. فدخل علي تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى. ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت السلام عليك أبته يا رسول الله، أتظنني أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بضعتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخلت تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد. فلما اكتمل مع جميع تحت الكساء أخذ بي رسول الله بطرف الكساء وأمر بيده اليمنى إلى السماء وقال اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وحامتي، لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي، يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم. أنا حرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن عادهم وموهب لمن أحبهم. إنهم مني وأنا منهم، فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم وأذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله. فقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكتي ويا سكان السماوات إني ما خلقت السماء مبنية ولا أرض مدحية ولا قمر منيرا ولا شمس مضيا ولا خلق يدور ولا بحر يجري ولا فلك يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء. فقال أمين جبرائيل يا رب من تحت الكساء؟ فقال عز وجل هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة، هم فاطمة وأبوها وبعدها وبنوها. اللهم صل على محمد.
محمد وآل محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم.
کفن بھی کیا کفن کی طرح روز چادر اس لحد پر چڑھاؤ گی تم. شام کی اور تو ایک وعدہ کرو. ایک یثرب کی تھی شاہزادی، اس کا سکا تھا عباس غازی. مشق لے کر گیا سوئے دریا اور قبضے میں کر لی ترائی. لوریوں میں یہ سچی کہانی روز اس کو سناؤ گی تم. شام کی اور تو ایک وعدہ کرو. ہم نے زنداں سے پائی رہائی، اب بہن پاس ہوگی نہ بھائی. بات اتنی سی بس یاد رکھنا، میری بچی ہے غم کی ستائی. تم نے بازار میں تو ستایا، اب نہ اس کو ستاؤ گی تم، شام کی اور تو ایک وعدہ کرو، جب کبھی قید خانے میں آنا، بے ردا بیویوں کو نہ لانا، تم کو اصغر بھی دے گا دعائیں، اس کی تنہائیاں یوں مٹانا، چھوٹے چھوٹے سے بچوں کو لا کر پاس اس کے سلاؤ گی تم، شام کی اور تو ایک وعدہ کرو، شامیوں کی بہو بیٹیوں سے کہہ رہی تھی وہ اکبر یہ رو کے، یہ امانت ہے پردیسیوں کی، کر رہی ہوں تمہارے حوالے، مجھ سے ایک بار بس اتنا کہہ دو، اپنا وعدہ نبھاؤ گی تم، شام کی اور تو ایک وعدہ کرو، چلو
بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات. سلامی جب گئے عباس مارے، سلامی جب گئے عباس مارے، علی روتے تھے دریا کے کنارے، دریا کے کنارے، سکینہ نے کہا آجا سکینہ نے کہا آجا اکیلے ہو گئے بابا ہمارے، اکیلے ہو گئے بابا ہمارے، علی روتے تھے دریا کے کنارے، دریا کے کنارے، میں کیوں بھیجی تمہیں مشکیز لے کر، میں کیوں بھیجی تمہیں مشکیز لے کر، میری خاطر کٹے بازو تمہارے، علی روتے تھے دریا کے کنارے، دریا کے کنارے، کوئی بے رحم مجھ سے پوچھے تو بابا، کوئی بے رحم مجھ سے پوچھے تو بابا، تماچے کیوں ہمیں ظالم نے مارے، علی روتے تھے دریا کے کنارے، دریا کے کنارے، چچا کی لاش پر بولی سکینہ، چچا کی لاش پر بولی سکینہ، دلا دو شمر سے گوہر ہمارے، علی روتے تھے دریا کے کنارے، دریا کے کنارے، صلوات۔ جب نوجواں پسر شہیدی سے جدا ہوا، رخصت روشن قمر پر بری سے جدا ہوا، نور نظر امام مبیں سے جدا ہوا، لخت جگر حسین و حزین سے جدا ہوا، دل داغ ہو گیا دلو جان بطول کا، گھر بے چراغ ہو گیا سب رسول کا، برچھی سے ٹکڑے ہو گیا لخت جگر کا دل، خود باپ نے چھدا ہوا دیکھا پسر کا دل، ہوتا ہے آپ گینے سے نازک بشر کا دل، پتھر کا دل نہیں ہے یہ دل ہے پدر کا دل، ایوب بھی اگر ہو تو غم پر نہ گر پڑے، آنسو تھمے تو منہ سے کلے جا نکل پڑے، پیری میں آفت غم اولاد علامہ دل اور زخم خنجرے فولاد علامہ و اضطراب خاطرے ناشاد علامہ وہ اشک سوز اور وہ فریاد علامہ بیٹا نہ ہو تو زیست کا پھر کیا مزہ رہا جب گھر اجڑ گیا تو زمانے میں کیا رہا پیارے نہ تھے حسین علیہ السلام کے لائی حرم سرا میں بہن ہاتھ تھام کے تھرا رہے تھے پاؤں شہتش ناکام کے سردوش پر تھا زینب علی مقام کے فرماتے تھے بہن علی اکبر گزر گئے ہم ایسے سخت جاں تھے کہ اب تک نہ مر گئے یہ سن کے بیویوں کے جگر پر چھری چلی زینب زمیں پہ گر کے پکاری کہ یا علی سرحق جہاں کے ہیں سب آپ پر جلی جاتا ہے سرکشوں میں یہ کونین کا ولی بے کس کو آسرا ہے پسر کا نہ بھائی کا بابا یہی تو وقت ہے مشکل کشائی کا فرمایا شین سب بہن چاہیے تمہیں خالق کی یاد سے رو علم چاہیے تمہیں رب پر رضا کا سہن چاہیے تمہیں جو ماں کا تھا چلن وہ چلن چاہیے تمہیں اب آخری بہن یہ سواری ہماری ہے بعد ان بزرگواروں کے باری ہماری ہے دیکھا یہ کہت کے حال بالی سکینہ کو یاد سے پیٹ لپٹی وہ درد کر لپٹی وہ دوڑ کر شہے گردو اساس سے طاقت نہ تھی کلام کی ہر چند پیاس سے بولی وہ تشن کام شہ حق شناس سے کیا اس بلا کے بن سے تہیا سفر کا ہے صدقے گئی بتاؤ ارادہ کدھر کا ہے فرمایا کہ شہ نہا سفر ناگزیر ہے آؤ گلے لگو کہ یہ صحبت اخیر ہے اب آرزو خرب خدائے خدیر ہے تنہائے ہم سے پا مخالف سب کثیر ہے طے ہو یہ مرحلہ جو اعانت خدا کرے جس کا نہ کوئی دوست ہو بھی وہ کیا کرے جانا ہے دور شب کو جو آنا نہ ہو ادھر ضد کر کے روئیو نہ ہمیں چاہتی ہو گر پہلے پہل ہے آج شب فرخت پدر سو رہی ہو ماں کی چھاتی پر غربت سے رکھ کے سر راحت کے دن گزر گئے یہ فصل اور ہے اب یوں بسر کرو جو یتیموں کا دور ہے ننے سے ہاتھ جوڑ کے بولی وہ تشنکاں بتلائیے مجھے کہ یتیمی ہے کس کا نام آنکھوں سے خون بہا کے کہنے لگے امام کھل جائے گا یہ درد و علم تم پتاب شام بی بی نہ پوچھو کچھ یہ مصیبت عظیم ہے مر جائے جس کا باپ وہ بچہ یتیم ہے مر جائے جس کا باپ وہ بچہ یتیم ہے صلوات
I'm sure there'll be more details. Want to donate, that possibly is not that as the older on the sister side.
Salawat.
Awaited Savior of humanity. Salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي محمد إمام حسن المجتبى صلوات الله وسلامه عليه اللهم صل على By now, as you know, there is a consensus amongst the scientific community in the world that says that the single gravest challenge facing humanity as a collective is the challenge of climate change and global warming. By now, you know that this is something that is no longer a matter of dispute or debate. In terms of the scientific consensus, the vast majority of the scientific community have agreed that not only is the planet warming, but also that this is occurring through the actions of you and I, by what man's hands have wrought. And of course, you probably know by now that the consequences of these are going to be catastrophic, not only in the future, but you can see what is happening to our planet in front of our very eyes. Only in this last month, around the world, we have seen that there have been record temperatures, and the ways in which those record temperatures have such an impact upon the global climate, the world's weather, and thus upon humanity and upon our earth at large. For example, in Canada recently, you've seen that there was heat waves and great fires. In Maui in Hawaii, only in the last few days, because of these great fires, still there are 330 bodies unaccounted for after those blazes. In Europe, in France, and in Greece, there were heat waves, and particularly again in Greece, there was great fires. In Pakistan recently, again, there was heat waves, and many people died from this. You know by now the level of catastrophe that global warming is actually going to bring about on this planet. Only a couple of months ago, actually, scientists told us that we are hurtling towards 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial times. That means that the surface temperature of the Earth is almost at 1.5 degrees centigrade above what the Earth's temperature was, surface temperature, compared to pre-industrial times. Previously, at the rate in which the Earth had been warming, it had been expected that we would not reach that sort of milestone until at least 2040, 2050, maybe even 2060. But only a couple of months ago, the IPCC made the announcement to say that we're actually likely, 66% likely to be able to reach that figure of 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial times within 5 years, smashing the records and also the consequences that are unfolding in front of us. If we were to reach 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial times as a temperature, the surface temperature on this planet, this would wreak havoc. Forget what you're seeing happening now in front of you. The consequences of it, for example, would be, according to scientific estimations, that the seas would rise some 48 centimeters above its current amount. And we would have somewhere in the region of 20 extra days per year of extreme heat waves. You can imagine what certain countries already go through when it comes to extreme heat. For example, in Pakistan or in Iraq, currently what is happening with the extreme heat waves. Can you imagine what will occur with an extra 20 days of extreme heat every single year? How it will devastate life, how it will devastate economy. and so on and so forth. The question we urgently need to ask ourselves is, as a Muslim ummah, and particularly as a Shia school of thought, what has been our response to this urgent question, this burning question that faces humanity at large? Where has been our thinking and our responses? Where have been the fatwa and the conferences? Where has been the direction from the Hawza Ilmiya? Where has been the creation of a bab of fiqh that gives us guidelines and gives us our laws as to how we are supposed to act when it comes to many of these most urgent masail that are facing us today? This is what our series will explore, inshallah, over these 3 nights. We want to ask the question of how we will create a bab of fiqh that genuinely responds to the urgent climate and environmental crisis that is upon us. How do the Maraji al-Kiram scope out a bab of fiqh, a chapter of law that helps to govern our actions? And what might be some of the examples of the masail that would affect us if there was to be such a bona fide chapter of fiqh that is so urgently required for us today? Why are we discussing this? Well, of course, number one, as we said, there is no more important a discussion in terms of the health of the planet than this one today. Number two, we are long overdue these discussions. Many a time, the pulpit ignores discussions about our duties and responsibilities to the planet, to the environment. We'll talk about every other subject, from aqa'id, from fiqh, from akhlaq, from ta'rikh, from tafsir, but how often do you ever hear of a series of discussions that looks at how the Quran and how the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam discuss the issue of the environment and our climate crisis? Number three, elsewhere in the world, as we will talk about, outside of the Shia school of thought, great strides are being made to be able to find solutions to the planetary crisis that is upon us, especially in the school of the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They have fatawa, they have institutions, Muslim institutions dedicated towards the issue of the environmental crisis and their response. In fact, they are writing at such a pace that they are now giving guidance to the United Nations itself. The question I pose is, where is the Shia leadership and response to this? Where do we obtain the guidance from school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam that is supposed to be within this field and within this framework? And number four, we need urgent action so that ourselves as individuals and as collectives know our duties and implement our duties. Can you imagine the level of duty that we have to each other, to the rest of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Part of the climate catastrophe that is upon us is not only things like warming. We're talking about the destruction and annihilation of species from this planet. We're talking about killing off animals and species and coral reefs. Only a couple of days ago, literally 2 days ago, there was a report that came out because of what was seen in 2022. I don't know if you've seen this report. You can Google this if you want right now. There was a report that came out just 2 days ago from an event that occurred in 2022. One of the ice sheets broke and actually swallowed up and killed approximately 10,000 penguins, baby penguins. Penguins are some of our most favorite animals. They're so beautiful and so cute to see. But did you know that because the planet's warmth is actually increasing, that an ice sheet broke and 10,000 baby penguins that had only just been bred, only just been born, could not yet swim. It was too cold for them to be in the water. They would not have access to food. The ice sheet crumbled and 10,000 penguins died. This is a result of mine and your behaviors, mine and your actions. In fact, the scientific community has known about global warming and predicted these events since as early as the 1930s. What year? The 1930s. Where are we now? 2023. We still don't have a single marja in the world that has provided us with a book of fatwa and guidances, practical guidances on our duties, on those things that are haram for us or wajib for us in our context. Almost 100 years the scientific community has been speaking and pleading with us to make changes in our behavior. But we have not bothered. Why? Because maybe the Shia community is not interested in these issues. They're interested in other things. We come for the majlis, we make sure we cry, we make sure we hear the story of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and Yazid, and we talk all day about right versus wrong, overthrowing tyranny. But actually, when death and destruction is happening because of the things that we do in the real world, we still don't have guidance as to how to be able to change our behavior, nor are people in the community interested in changing their behaviors. Therefore, for these above reasons, it is urgent that we not only discuss this topic, but also think about how we can forge a genuine, bona fide fiqh of environment and climate in order to be able to respond to the crisis. And this will be our series over the next 3 nights, inshallah, with your blessings and allowed salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In terms of tonight, our discussion is going to be around scoping a chapter of fiqh. When we say that there is a bab of fiqh, how do the marajit create this? How do marajit search for verses and ahadith and principles within their law in order to construct a bab of fiqh, which would ultimately be laws that you and I have to emulate? As you know, in the ahkam of the sharia, there is what is known as ahkam al-khamsa. There are 5 types of laws. There are those which are wajib upon us. There are those which are mustahab upon us. Are there things that might be wajib for us in the context in which we find? As an example, just thinking in terms of laying out the series and helping you to think about these questions, is it possible for a marja to stipulate it can be wajib for us to have green technologies or to start entering into green technologies? Think about this question carefully. As you know, sometimes there's something called wajib aini, something that is wajib upon you as an individual. What is wajib aini or salah? At times there is something which is called wajib kifai, that enough people participate in this act in order to absolve the rest of us from the act, correct? If someone dies, giving that person ghusl, kafan and dafan, is it wajib aini or wajib kifai? Wajib kifai. And sometimes there is something what is called wajib majmu'i, where all of us have to be able to participate in that thing, because the matter is of such grave concern that all of us have to participate. No one is free from that duty in that moment. Think about this question. In terms of securing the planet, preserving its health for tomorrow, and our children inheriting a planet that is breathable, instead of killing off the lungs of the planet in the Amazon rainforest, or instead of destroying the soil of the planet so that we can't grow food anymore, is it possible for a marja to stipulate that something like this action is wajib kifai or wajib majmu'i? Can you see this question? So sometimes we have the potential question, can certain environmental laws be wajib upon us? Or if not, can they be mustahab upon us? This is a question, a fiqhi question. Or for example, sometimes within the ahkam al-khamsa, we have the opposite. Sometimes laws are not wajib, but they are haram for us. It's haram for us to be able to act in a certain way. If you and I are going to do something that is going to cause great harm to the planet or to another human being, is it possible for a marja to be able to make an act haram upon us? Or if not haram, makruh upon us? Can you see? So the ahkam al-khamsa of being wajib, mustahab, mubah, haram and makruh, these are fiqh questions. So in terms of scoping the potential for a bab of fiqh, we're going to be asking, how does a marja actually do that tonight? Where do we get the space to be able to create a chapter of law dedicated towards the matters of the environment and to the climate? And then inshallah tomorrow night and the next night, we will try to pick certain masail that might actually be discussed as a research in Bahth Kharij, in the Hawza Ilmiya, such that if they made a fatwa in this way, how might it actually arrive to us? And what would be our potential duties when it comes to either stopping a particular action or minimizing a particular action or actually performing a particular action? So inshallah, tonight's discussion will simply be an introduction, a primer as to how we may begin to scope the idea of a genuine, bona fide fiqh of environment. What is this called in Arabic? This is called fiqh al-bi'ah. Al-bi'ah, normally translated as the environment. And so from time to time, when I use that word, this is what I mean. Fiqh al-bi'ah will be the fiqh of the environment and the climate, and a bona fide chapter of law. Just like you open the Risala Amaliyah and you see laws for Salah. You see Masail Shar'iyya for Hajj. Masail Shar'iyya for Khumus. Can there potentially be a bona fide chapter in the Masail of environmental law that you and I would open and say, Mas'ala 1050, this is my duty in this circumstance. This is how I'm supposed to act in accordance with this particular issue. And this, inshallah, is what we'll be discussing tonight with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We live in very politicized times. Every issue is highly politicized. Sometimes, depending on where you sit within that sort of political spectrum, to the right or to the left, often that guides the way in which people think. For many people, the topic of global warming is a political topic, isn't it? They see it through the lens of whether they are a Democrat or a Republican. You probably saw a little bit of the primaries or the discussions, the debate that's been taking place in the Republican primaries. Ask yourself, how many of those candidates not only ignored on that platform, ignored the most gravest issue of our time, but actually go a step further and deny it? Almost all of them. And some of them do it because they have to play to their base and they have to kind of cultivate the nonsense and the stupidity in people. That's part of their what they do. You know that better than me. But some of them genuinely believe this. Now, if you live in certain states, the way in which they will see the issue of the environment is going to be seen through the lens of politics. Here, as an example, I was being told by Brother Azim earlier on when he picked me up from the airport, he was telling me that in schools, for example, there's a sort of culture, and in the wider state here, there's a wider culture to emphasize on the importance of recycling, for example. And just normal things of being able to separate certain types of things in order to have a good conscience as to what we are doing when it comes to recycling. Whereas in other states, it might be southern states or elsewhere, they don't even have this sort of culture because there's a denial that there's a problem. The idea of having an environmental vision is not built into our practice. Now that may be from the perspective of politics. From the perspective of Islam, Islam has given dozens, hundreds of verses of the Quran regarding the environment. Literally thousands of ahadith on the importance of the environment and how we are supposed to govern ourselves when it comes to the engagement of our environment, our ecology, and our climate. Even the way we're supposed to engage with other planets as well. There are verses of the Quran and ahadith that talk to us about how we're supposed to engage with interplanetary systems, let alone our own planet. So this isn't an issue of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. It doesn't matter. From an Islamic perspective, there are certain duties that are upon us. Some of them are scoped from our aqa'id, which we'll discuss, and some of them are scoped by the actual masail shar'iyya that are given to us by Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So it's important for you and I that not only when we sit within the mosque or the Husayniyya or the masjid, that we're thinking environmentally. There is an Islamic duty upon us that wherever we are, whether we're in work or in school or at the mall, there are certain duties that are upon us, especially those when it comes to the environment. Irrespective of whether there was a climate crisis or not, there are still certain duties that are upon us. I want to be able to show you a couple of verses of the Quran, to be able to appreciate that the Quran introduces the importance of this topic. So please open your Qur'ans to Surah Ar-Rahman, chapter number 55 of the Holy Quran, from verse number 7. We'll read a few verses and just see how Allah introduces this topic. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ. Very famous set of verses. And the sky, Allah raised it high and He made a balance, a mizan. وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ أَنْ لَا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ. That you may not be inordinate, you may not destroy, you may not do evil, may do harm to that balance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. أَنْ لَا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ. Allah has set up a mizan. Now look where Allah talks about the mizan. He doesn't just say that there's a mizan in the earth, on the surface of the earth, or in the seas. He even says it in the sky. What is global warming about? It is the release of certain gases that accumulate within the sky, within the stratosphere, and actually warm up the planet. We are not supposed to do harm even to the sky. Can you see? أَلَّا تَطَغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ. Even in the sky, you are not permitted to be able to do any of this harm. وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانِ. And you should keep up that balance, that equity, that justice, and do not make the measure deficient. Where? وَالْأَرْضَ وَضَعَهَا لِلْأَنَامِ. And the earth, He has set it for living creatures. When we destroy the planet, we are actually going against the balance that God has created within His system. We are duty bound to keep that balance that Allah Jalla Jalaluhu has established within the system. And when we break it, we become taghut. And la tatghaw fil mizan. Do not break that balance. Subhanallah. Think about this very carefully. Fir'aun taghi, Muawiyah taghi, Yazid taghi. But also me and you can also be amongst the taghut. Being amongst the taghut from the Quranic perspective is not simply only killing Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam or Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. When we destroy our own planet, we become taghi. Can you imagine? That puts us in the same rank as whom? People like Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, na'udhu billah. Very important for you and I to think as the Quran tells us to think. This isn't a position as to whether you're a Democrat or whether you're a Republican. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu has spoken to us in this language in the Quran. Open another ayah if you will. Chapter number 25, Surah Al-Furqan, verse number 63. Chapter number 25, Surah Al-Furqan, verse number 63. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu tells us that there are special servants of His. And the way in which they act is that they treat the earth gently. They're not exploitative. They're not damaging to the planet. They actually participate in the world humbly and gently. That's the way we're supposed to live. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ, the servants of the All-Merciful. الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ, those who walk on the earth. How do they walk upon the earth? How do they participate with the planet? هَوْنًا, humbly, gently with the planet. Not destructively. How? But gently and humbly. That is the way we're supposed to be with the planet. Subhanallah. وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا salama. You see, in the same ayah, Allah says there are those who are going to walk gently on the earth, humbly with the earth. On the other side, there are people who are ignorant. Very interesting how Allah sets up the dichotomy here. Question is, which one am I? How do I act with the planet? How am I engaged with the planet? This is something we have to think about in terms of our own behaviors. Now, it wouldn't surprise you, I hope. It wouldn't surprise you, I hope, to tell you that in our books of hadith, Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have predicted global warming. Does it surprise you if I tell you that? It doesn't surprise. It shouldn't surprise you. This is Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. They told you that before the end of time, you'll be able to look into the palm of your hand and speak to someone and see someone from the other side of the planet. You've seen these hadith, correct? So would it surprise you if Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam spoke about global warming? No, it wouldn't surprise you. Let me give you one hadith as a flavor of the example of how this was important to Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Hadith comes to us from our 8th holy Imam, Ali ibn Musa al-Rida, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Imam alayhi salam, it's a hadith where he says, قَبْلَ هَذَا الْأَمْرِ بُيُوحٍ, before the advent of the awaited savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif, is buyuh. قَبْلَ هَذَا الْأَمْرِ بُيُوحٍ. Imam al-Rida alayhi salam said in the hadith. The companion who narrates this hadith said, I didn't understand the meaning of the word buyuh. Sometimes we might say a word, even in English or in Arabic or in Farsi, doesn't mean that you understand the meaning of the word. Sometimes it's a word that we're not familiar with. Companion in the hadith says, I didn't know the meaning of the word buyuh, فَحَجَّجْتُ. So I went on Hajj. And as I was doing tawaf of the Kaaba, an A'rabi, a Bedouin man said, what a bayuh day this is. So I asked the Bedouin, what is this word bayuh that you've used? My Imam also used this word. And he said, ash-shadid al-har, extreme warmth. The word bayuh means extreme heat. Imam al-Rida alayhi salam said, before the advent of the 12th Imam will be buyuh, extreme heat. What we term today, global warming. Can you see? Now the Imam didn't say that this has to happen forever, or that it has to destroy our planet. The Imam said, there will be buyuh, there will be warming before the 12th Imam comes. This is something that's going to happen, but in terms of the potential to limit it, to bring it back within certain planetary boundaries, that is possibility for you and I. And on the last night, on Sunday night, I'm going to specifically talk about the ayat of the Quran. Allah promises, He says, the planet will respond to your actions. I'll show you verses, several verses of the Quran. He says it in both ways, by the way. He says, if you do harm to the planet will harm you back. I will show you these verses. And then he says, if you do good to the planet will do good back to you. The planet is a living, conscious being of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't think of it as an inanimate object. يُسَبِّحُ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Everything is glorifying Allah. Everything is conscious. including of our actions, not just what Allah tells it, our actions. So the Imam predicts that there will be buyuh, extreme heat, before the 12th Imam. But he didn't say that it has to be at 3 degrees C, or 2.5 degrees C, or 1.5 degrees C. That's in mine, in your hands, which we'll come to on Sunday night, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So here, just as a primer, the Quran talks about the duty of not breaking the balance that Allah has set up, that we have to act gently with the earth, and that even global warming had been mentioned by Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam. Part of Islam, part of the duties that Islam has as a religion is to make laws and governances and policies that help us to be able to live in this world dutifully. You'll see that whenever there was any issue at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whenever those laws came in the Quran and Ahadith, they weren't perfunctory laws. Do you understand what I mean by the word perfunctory? They weren't simply just a sort of intervention for the sake of an intervention, just speaking for the sake of it. It wasn't sticking a plaster over a gaping wound. When there were genuine societal problems, Allah revealed verses to intervene. The Prophet gave a hadith to intervene, and the mu'mineen were expected to act upon those such that we would change the behavior of society for the better. And you all know this. Prior to Islam, and when the Prophet started his public mission, they used to bury their daughters and sons alive. You remember this? Female infanticide, right? On the Day of Judgment, the girl, the baby girl that had been buried alive, she will be asked, بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ? For what reason were you buried? Why was I buried alive? Islam didn't just say, okay, there's a social problem, you carry on, no problem, you carry on doing what you want. It intervened. It gave us laws to prohibit bad actions, but it also expected all of us mu'mineen and mu'minat to participate in those laws. The laws weren't perfunctory. People were gambling, going to war with each other as tribal wars. There was alcohol all over the community. They used to perform tawaf of the Kaaba naked at that time. Every practice, the Quran came and intervened, and they expected people to be able to change their behaviors. I'm asking a simple question. If the Prophet was here now, and the gravest concern for the planet, for human beings at large, 7.5 billion people, was the potential that our own home could be uninhabitable in a few years' time. Do you imagine the Quran would be silent? Do you imagine the Prophet would be silent? Do you imagine the Imam would have no hadith to intervene on our behaviors? Impossible. Impossible. Islam has always guided and intervened wherever there has been overstepping of the boundaries, exploitation, corruption, fasad, fitna, wherever it's been, Islam has intervened and expected the mu'mineen to be able to respond in life. Now, if you think about this bab, this potential chapter of fiqh that guides us on what is haram and wajib and mustahab and makruh, look how wide this chapter of fiqh would have to be, how involved in our lives it could be, and how restraining and guiding it actually could be. We have really important fundamental questions here. If science has a consensus on a matter, whatever the matter is, if science has a consensus on the matter, how does that impact us in terms of fiqh? You see, if 98% of all scientists agree with a matter and say, this is urgent, how does the marja respond? Or even if there's not a scientific consensus, let's say that we are receiving new interpretations, new science is coming out and saying, this is an act that we need to follow, or we need to implement this behavior. What does the marja do with a scientific opinion? This is very key to the issue. Because if you say, well, we don't take from science, then you have to not take from science in all other areas. Think about how many times, in terms of our medical interventions, the fatwa is based on the science. How many people here are doctors? Hands up. No one here? MashaAllah. You know, you'll be able to tell the mu'mineen better than me about, let's say, a stroke and a brain stem. And the impact that that one particular issue has on the way in which life support or the end of life is dealt with. Can you see? We have to follow sometimes the science and the medical expertise. So in this issue, when it comes to scientific expertise, those who are experts in bi'ah, fiqh al-bi'ah, in the environment and in climate, if you have an expert or a consensus, what does the mujtahid have to do? You can see this is an issue that is raised. What else? Not only does it come to the question of the role of science, we also have the role of our economy as well. The way in which we purchase, the economic boundaries that we are in, the way in which we utilize our wealth, the way in which our economy itself is structured, ultimately has an impact on our environment. This is a central, a key question. International relations. When you have the environment doesn't care for your national borders, does it? It doesn't care if you live in Iran or in Iraq. My brother will tell you about the marshlands in Iraq, around Basra. What's happened? How much have they dried up? Almost entirely the marshlands. You know that in Iraq, one of the gravest concerns is access to water, right? Because the rivers, the two major rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates, where do they come from? Do they start in Iraq? They start from Turkey. So if there's an environmental catastrophe in Turkey, it directly affects in Iraq. The way in which one country lives, the way in which one country has its laws and its governance, it relates to another country. There's international relations issues here as well. Another issue will be migration, because one of the key issues in the next 50 years is, as you know, you've probably heard, climate migration. SubhanAllah, right now, how many people are migrating from South American countries to the southern border of the United States of America? You know, it's a political issue, isn't it? I don't need to tell you that. In Britain, you know, the biggest political issue at the moment is migration, asylum seekers. Every day people are going across the channel, the English Channel, on boats arriving in the UK. The single biggest issue in both of our countries, in the UK, in the United States of America, is the border. Tell me, what happens when there's an environmental catastrophe in South America and people from Paraguay, people from Chile, people from Mexico are going northward to get to cooler climates? And you have a certain Mr. Trump that wants to be able to build a 4,000-mile wall. Why do you think he wanted a wall? You think he really cares? No. There are things going on behind the scenes. They know that there's going to be a climate disaster in 50 years' time. Mass migration movements. They don't care about, 100 Mexicans, 1,000 Mexicans, 50,000 Mexicans, when millions of people are displaced. They have to plan in advance for that. That's the reason why your orange friend started talking about those things 8 years ago. It's a really good mugshot, by the way. Another issue that we'd have to talk about, food security. Because with the degradation of the soil, we're actually producing less food. One of the greatest challenges that you will face in the next 50 years, sadly, is going to be a lack of food availability. This is something predicted by climatologists. We also have the issue of activism. There are many people who are activists and want to actually engage in trying to put a response together. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll go through the Masail Shar'iyya of civil disobedience and what the Maraji' say about the permissibility or impermissibility of civil disobedience towards protecting the climate. You will know, our brother will know, in Iraq, there are climate activists that are actually arrested in Iraq for their climate activism. Question is, according to Amaraji, if you be an activist for the climate protection, is it permitted or not permitted? We'll talk about this tomorrow, inshallah. Now we have to realize that all of these issues have to be given guidance from the Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and the principles that we have. I want to show you just one verse as an example that has a real impact on the way in which we interpret matters. Because if you interpret this verse one way, it has a grave impact on one of the discussions and another way. Remember, we just said that one of the ways that this has an intersection, climate issue, intersects with the economy, right? Let me show you a verse that if you interpret it one way, it'll impact your economic principles. And if you interpret the verse another way, it'll impact your economic idea another way. Open the Quran to Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2 of the Quran, verse number 29. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In capitalism, you are permitted to be able to utilize and exploit anything and everything so long as you are making money. Is that a fair assumption about capitalism? Capitalism doesn't care about planetary boundaries, how much you can use. The idea is that we will use as much, we will burn as much, so long as CEO makes money, investors make money, shareholders make profit. If I'm wrong about that assumption, tell me. But that's my understanding of capitalism. Is that yours? Fair? Okay. Have a look at this ayah and tell me what you think of it. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Huwa alladhi khalaqa lakum ma fil ardi jami'an. He is the one, Allah is the one, who is created for you, lakum, for all of you, ma fil ardi jami'an. Whatever is in the earth in its entirety. Now this is a very important, subtle point. In the Arabic language, there is what's known as itlaq. Itlaq means something which is absolute. There's no condition, there's no qaid on it, there's no limitation on it. So when Allah tells you, you can use something, if He Himself does not put a qaid on it, a limitation on it, the traditional opinion has been that there is itlaq. You can use it absolutely, as you want, freely, completely, as you want. Look at that verse. هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. He is the one who has created for you whatever is in the earth. The vast majority of our fuqaha and mufassirin have explicitly stated the meaning of this verse is that you and I can use everything within the earth with itlaq, absolutely, as we please. If you look at, for example, tafsir of Ayatollah Hadi Ma'rifat, he says this. If you look at, for example, great scholar Muqaddas Ardabali, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhima, they say this is itlaq. Allah says you can use whatever as you want, fully, completely. Tell me something. From a climate perspective, from staying within boundaries of the planet, are we allowed to use whatever we want? Or are there limitations upon us? Let's ask this question differently. However much oil there is, or fossil fuels there are in the ground, can I burn those freely as much as I want? From the perspective of climate and preserving the climate, are we allowed to burn what we want? Yes or no? No. So traditionally, our economic theory, Muslim, Islamic economic theory, based on this ayah, have told us all, you can use whatever is in the planet, whatever you want, however you want, without any boundaries. Itlaqan, as you want. Don't take my word for it. You can go and read the tafasir for yourself. And so the idea has been, in the economy, you can do what you want, no problem. All of Earth, which has been created for you, you can use it as you want. Now tell me something. Do we have a limited fishery stock in the planet? Yes, we do. You can't overfish, because if you overfish, you will destroy it entirely. Can you cut down the Amazon rainforest, itlaqan, which is the lungs of the planet, which takes carbon dioxide and then turns it back into oxygen? Can you do this? No, you can't. Because if you destroy the lungs of the planet, literally, we will not be able to breathe. We will die out as a species very, very quickly. So the way in which we look at this topic has to be by rereading the ayat of the Quran and rereading the ahadith in the context of the planetary boundaries that are upon us. Because if we don't do that, then we will have no way of reconstructing an actual fiqh that is there for us. All we will do is replicate what is already there within capitalism itself. This is a very, very important assumption that I'm trying to tell you, because as we go in tomorrow, there's no specific hadith that tells you this is wajib, this is haram regarding climate, in the context of the real challenges that we have. I'll give you an example. One of the biggest polluting issues is our cars, or flying, or consuming meat. The biggest single contributor to global warming is actually the amount of meat that we consume. Industrial level farming, methane, the cows that we industrially produce and then kill for our beef burgers. Do you know that? But at the same time, the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has a hadith which all the maraji' use in their fiqh. The Prophet said, La dharar wa la dhirar. Islam does not permit you to cause harm. Now think about this question. If we have an act that is harming the planet at catastrophic levels, literally is going to be the cause of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people dying, the act, and the Prophet said, La dharar wa la dhirar, you are not permitted to harm. No harm, no harming. Islam does not permit harm. There's an act that I'm doing that's harming the planet. Dharar al-akbar, grievous planetary harm. And the Prophet said, you can't do harm. How do I put these two things together? Can you see? But if I just reinterpret the same verses in the same hadith in the old ways, like we might have done 200 years ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, we will never be able to produce a chapter of fiqh that is genuinely responding to the crisis at hand. So this is what we need to think about. One last thing I want to be able to introduce to you as by way of talking about how we structure a bab of fiqh. The moment we have any significant number of masail in any one topic, the marja is permitted to make this as a bab of fiqh. So let's say there are 10 masail regarding wudu, or 20 masail regarding wudu, just as an example. Immediately those 20 issues, how you do wudu, what happens if you don't have water, what happens if you have water but if you use it, it will harm someone else, and so the moment you have 20 questions on any topic, 5 questions on any topic, you can begin to make a bona fide chapter of fiqh. This is why we have a chapter on wudu, a chapter of tahara, a chapter on zakat, a chapter on this, every single chapter of fiqh. Traditionally, the maraji' have followed a system of how the fiqh works, of how the abwab, the chapters of fiqh work. Set up by one of the great scholars in the previous centuries. In recent times, there are some maraji' that are beginning to innovate. I don't mean the word innovation negatively, like bid'ah.
جب کبھی غیرت کا سوال آتا ہے، بنت زہرا تیرے پردے کا خیال آتا ہے، بنت زہرا تیرے پردے کا خیال آتا ہے، مٹھیاں بھیج کے پھیری ہے زباں ہونٹوں پر، مٹھیاں بھیج بنت زہرا پردے کا خیال آتا اکبر پکھڑی موت کس سوچ میں لاش اکبر پکھڑی، کیا پیمبر کی جوانی کا خیال آتا ہے، تیرے پردے کا خیال آتا ہے، گرمیاں کے تنہا نظر آتے ہیں حسین، گرمیاں لاشوں کے تنہا نظر آتے ہیں حسین، کہ عاشور کے سورج کو زوال آتا ہے، بنت زہرا تیرے پردے کا خیال آتا ہے، بنت زہرا تیرے پردے کا خیال آتا ہے، گڑھ کے عباس کلیجے سے لگا لیتے ہیں، بڑھ کے عباس کلیجے سے لگا لیتے ہیں، جب سکینہ کی یتیمی کا خیال آتا ہے، بنت زہرا تیرے پردے کا خیال آتا ہے، بنت زہرا تیرے پردے کا خیال آتا ہے، یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین، وہ عابد بیمار تھا، وہ عابد بیمار تھا، چلنے سے جو لاچار تھا، چلنے سے جو لاچار تھا، اور شام کا بازار تھا، اور شام کا بازار تھا، اور مصطفیٰ کی بیٹیاں مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین، شبیر کی وہ لاڈلی، شبیر کی وہ لاڈلی، سینے پہ جو شاک پلی، سینے پہ جو شاک پلی، جس کی ابا بن میں جلی، جس کی ابا بن میں جلی، منہ پر تماچوں کے نشان، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین 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 صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد.
السلام علیکم یا رسول اللہ، السلام علیکم یا نبی اللہ، السلام علیکم یا حبیب اللہ، السلام علیکم یا فاطمہ الزہرا، السلام علیکم یا
اس کے اندر چار کر دیتے آپ اس کے اندر چار چینل ہے 541 546 561 560 دیکھ رہے آپ چار سب کے الگ تو یہ چار چینل ہے ٹھیک ہے تو چار مائکرو فون ہے اس کے ٹھیک ہے اپنے پاس ایک ہی ہے یہ بھی صحیح نہیں ہے لیکن یہ جو ہے یہ ایک ہی چینل پہ چل رہا ہے 54090 اگر آپ دیکھو گے تو یہ کہہ رہا ہے یہ صرف ایک ہی فریکوینسی پہ چلتا ہے 54190 ٹھیک ہے اب جب یہ صرف ایک ہی فریکوینسی پہ چلتا ہے تو اگر یہ سارے میگا ہرٹز میں ہوتا ہے یہ 541 میگا ہرٹز کا چینل ہوتا ہے کوئی تو ہمارا فون
नेटवर्क, ये सारी चीजें भी वही फ्रीक्वेंसी पे होती है ना, तो इंटरफेरेंस कभी कभी क्रिएट कर देती है, या तो कभी कभी मुझे लगता है कि रेंज दूर हो जाती है। ऐसा होगा कि
Oh, that's it.